Today's daf is daf Chaf Aleph. Up to daf Chaf Aleph on the second line, Rabbi Yochanan. Ilfa Rabbi Yochanan. Two young scholars, budding scholars. They were Chavrusa, Havigarsi, Boraisa. They were learning together the Chikule Milsa Tuva. And Parnasa became very, very difficult. And they couldn't support themselves. They were very, very poor. Amri. So they said to each other, sort of like an agreement, Nekum v'netzel v'nevad itzka. Why don't we get up, leave the base medrash, we'll have to put Torah study on the back burners for the time being, and we'll dedicate ourselves to a parnasa, to a tzchora. Not so good tzchora, let's get involved in a business. And now we'll be able to fulfill that which it says in the pasuk, Dvarim Tesvav, Efes Kilo Yelecha B'cha Evyon, and B'cha, we darshan that make all the efforts and be very careful that you should come to Anius. Azlu, they went out to find a place of schora, and on their way, they're on the journey, Otzvi Tusei Guda Re'iyah, they sat down under a weak wall, which is called in Lashon Kodesh a kosel ra'ua. In Aramaic, it's called a guda re'iyah. And even though it's asur, you're not allowed to stand under a weak wall. That's putting yourself into danger. And we saw that already back on Daf Chaf. And Rav and Shmuel wouldn't even walk under a kosel ra'ua. So how much more so not to eat a pasta? So you have to assume that Ilfa and Rabbi Yochanan, they didn't know it was a kosel ra'ua. That's why they thought it was a healthy, solid wall. Kakarchi rifta, they were eating bread. Otsu trei malachi ashares. Two angels came down. Shamei Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan, not Ilfa, but Rabbi Yochanan alone heard what the malachim were conversing one to the other. One of these malachim turns to his friend and he says, Nishte alayu hai guda v'naktolinu. Why don't we knock down this wall and they will be killed? Why? What was their guilt? Shemenichim chaye olam haba. The oskim b'chayishna, they are willing to forfeit the eternal world for the sake of this world. This world meaning schora, for support, for earnings, in order to have a parnos. Now, it seems that they were guilty here because of hafstaka, meaning they were involved and dedicated to learning Yom V'Layla, and now they interrupted it. On top of that, they were in a makom sakana. And whenever you stand in a makom sakana, the Satan is mekaching b'shasa sakana. The Malachim thought that in the Gemara, based on the Gemara Menachos Mem Aleph, when the Malach said to Rav Katina that during a moment of anger, we punish a person, even on a mitzvah saseh that he violated. And this is called, when you sit yourself down in a makom sakana, that's called kas. That's an ace kas. And they were considered, according to the malachim, a shtickle begeder poresh minat Torah. Even someone who's poresh minat Torah, there's a sakana, and you need chesed of Hashem. Because if not for the midas chesed, and then again combine that with the fact that they were makom sakon. Amalu idach, the other malach retorted, shavkinu, let's leave them, let's not kill them. Why? Dikabu chad, one of the two of them, bekaime le shaita, his mazel will stand up for him. In other words, he will be down the line in the future a true gadol, and therefore, why take his life prematurely? He's got a bright future in Torah learning, as a leader of Torah, Judaism, and also as a transmitter of Torah, we're not going to take his law. And the Maharsha explains here that there are two kitos of Malach Esharis. There are two groups of Malach. There are those on the right side, that's the Tzad Tov, and those on the left side, the Tzad Ra. And that's based on the Gemara on Shabbos, Kufyutes, that Shnei Malachim Shos Balavim Esa'ad. Here too, these two Malach Esharis sat on the sides of Ilfa and Rabbi Yochanan under this Kotzer Ruah. And one Malach was speaking words of castigation, of prosecution, and Ra. And look at these people, they're leaving Chai Olam for Chai Shah. The other Malach, who's the Malach HaTov, on the right side, he responds that one of them is Asid Leos Gadol, and he'll be a Gadol in Chai Olam, in the Torah that has to be transmitted in this world. He will become the Rosh Hashiva. We have to let him go. Rabbi Yochanan Shama, ve'ilfa lo Shama. Ilfa did not overhear the conversation of the Malach Eshas Amalei Rabbi Yochanan le'ilfa Shama Marmidi. Rabbi Yochanan turns to Ilfa and he asks, did you hear anything? Amalei lo, I didn't hear any voices, any sounds. There's nothing unusual going on. And therefore, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, I heard the voices of the Malach, and Ilfa did not hear them. Shmamini, I should derive the conclusion that Lididi Kaimali Shaita, that what the Malach said about one of these two, but he didn't mention their name specifically, that Kaimala Shaita, that was a reference to me, that my mazel will allow me to become a gadol. I'm going to go back to study Torah, and I will fulfill with my own self the pasuk lo yechtal evyon mikerev haaretz, which is, I believe, a pasuk in Parshas Re'eh. And what we derive from this pasuk is that li'olam, a person, should realize that there's no way out. There's always going to be Evyonis b'Yisrael. There will always be poor people amongst Israel. And that means that the Torah will go on, the study of Torah will continue, even through poverty. So again, just to summarize what we learned in this Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan heard the voices of the Malach, and he understood by doing a little bit of analysis that he was the one who would be designated amongst these two scholars to be a gadol and to transmit Torah. And therefore, Rabbi Yochanan Hadar, Rabbi Yochanan went back to study Torah, and he dropped the ball on this Esek v'Parnasa, on this Chora, whereas Ilfa lo Hadar. Ilfa didn't hear the voice of the Malach, and therefore, he continued on his way to be Osek B'Schora, and for the time being, he gave up his study of Torah. And what Rabbi Yochanan derived from this pasuk of Efes ki lo yeh b'cha evyon is that a person who's not learning Torah, he should be very careful to avoid anius, poverty. But if for the sake of Torah, he will be Makayim, the Kilo Yechtal Evyon, to leave Chai Shah and to dedicate himself to Chai Olam, that's permissible. Now, there's an interesting question here that's raised. Rabbi Yochanan, just simply asked Ilfa, did he hear the voice of the Malachim? Rabbi Yochanan himself understood that Yamad lo mazal l'gadol, and why didn't he reveal the secret to Ilfa? Maybe Ilfa would have also been a candidate for the fulfillment of these words in the Malachei Asharis. In the Chidah, quoted here in the note, he says, Lo chazar rak mitam zeh. Rabbi Yochanan didn't go back to the Beis Medrash simply because he wanted to become a gadol and fulfill that, so to speak, prophecy of the Malachim. Because if you say that, l'chora, what does he say to Ilfa? He says to Ilfa, that you could be Makayim Anius for the sake of Esa Katorah, be an Ani. Even before he heard the Malach, he had already made a decision that he would go back to the Beis Medrash. And the reason for that is because the idea, the transmission of the Malach was primarily that don't leave Chaye Olam, eternal life, for the sake of Aisha. So that when Rabbi Yochanan told Ilfa that he's going back to be Makayim in himself, Kilo Yechal Evyo, meaning to be Osek B'Torah Mitoch Anius, that is true, because he didn't want to leave Olam Haba for sake Olam Haba, for Olam Hazeh for Chaisha. Now, again, just to clarify, Rabbi Yochanan did not reveal to Ilfa this concept or the Kapeda of the Malachim of Menichim Olam Haba, Olam Hazeh, Olam Haba, V'yoskim B'Chaisha Olam Hazeh. That's because Rabbi Yochanan thought, and this is the Bet Ish Chai, that if Ilfa would go back with him to the Beis Medrash, then Ilfa would be appointed as the Rosh Hashiva. The reason for that is because Ilfa was greater than Rabbi Yochanan. But Rabbi Yochanan knew that Asid Limanos ki Rosh Hashiva, that in the future, as the Malach predicted it, Rabbi Yochanan would be appointed as Rosh Hashiva. And therefore Ilfa would be sort of pushed away to the side. Therefore, he didn't want to reveal this concept that the Malachim were makpidim, because Rabbi Yochanan, was chosen for this particular task, which would require that he learn Torah B'Tocha Oni. And he knew that if Ilfa would go back with him, Ilfa would suffer psychologically tremendously, because Rabbi Yochanan would be appointed as the Rosh Hashiva, not Ilfa. Anyway, Adi Asa Ilfa, until the point in which Ilfa was ready, he had made some money, he had money in the bank, and he was ready to return to the Beis Medrash. Molech Rabbi Yochanan in the interim, they had appointed Rabbi Yochanan as the Rosh Hashiva. Amru lo, so the people said to Ilfa, Iasiv mar v'goris, lo avi molech mar. If you, meaning Ilfa, would have dedicated yourself to Torah study, wouldn't you have been appointed as Rosh Hashiva? When Ilfa heard this, Azal tola nafshe bi askarya desvina, he tied himself to the mast of a boat. Omer, and he declared, if there's somebody out there that's shoyel, who could ask a question with Masnisa on a brisa of either Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Osha, they were the ones who organized the brisos. And you'll ask me, does this brisa reflect a particular shita or not? I will be able to answer that question. And if I can't prove from a Mishnah that the shita of the brisa is reflecting that shita in the Mishnah, then nafilna me'askarya desfinasa mitava. I'm going to let go, and I'm going to fall and basically be drowned. Because even though I went to study to schora, I went out to business, nevertheless, I learned more than Rabbi Yochanan. If I haven't forgotten my Talmud, and I can clarify all the brisos that were organized and edited by Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Oshia. That was his claim. He's not afraid that anyone could come along and stump him and ask him from a brisa, and he wouldn't be able to attribute the authorship of the brisa to one or the other of Tanoim to identify that Tan of the Mishnah. Now the question here is, how could Ilfa put himself into this situation where if Chas v'shalom he couldn't answer the question, he would be ma'abed atzmo l'das. He would let go, fall from the mast of the spina. If, on the other hand, he wouldn't fulfill his promise, then he would be violating Sheket. Ilfa knew how to swim, and those who know how to swim, they can stand in a high place and throw themselves down into a river, even a deep river, and immediately rise up from the bottom and swim and save themselves. Therefore, we could say about Ilfa, if he wouldn't know the answer to the possible question that would be answered, and but he was a good swimmer. He could have gotten an Olympic medal with such a great swimmer like Mark Spitz. So when he said he would throw himself into the river and it would look like he's drowning himself, that was a lashon of bdichos. That he was just joking around, so to speak. He wasn't absolutely serious about that. He wanted the Chacham to come and ask him questions. And as a result of that question, it would become clear why he went out on this sfina, which now the sfina becomes just a metaphor, to a makom rach. But one of the elders came forward when he heard Ilfa's declaration and tunnel it. And he reviewed in the presence of Ilfa a certain brisa about a person who's on his last, he's notel amus, as we say. And very often when a person realizes that the end is very close, then he wants to do with his money what he wants to do to make sure that whichever of his heirs will inherit his money. And that's called mafkid biyad shlish. He appoints a shlish, someone who will be, so to speak, an escrow, who will be in charge of divvying out his money. The omer, tnu shekel lebonai b'Shabbos. Guarantee that after my death, on a weekly basis, a shekel will be given to my children from the estate in order to support their endeavors and especially to get through Shabbos. In truth, 1 shekel on a weekly basis is certainly not sufficient for their parnosa. They were ru'uyim laseis sela. Sela is twice the amount of a shekel. 2 shkolim make up a sela, and they would require, in order to get to have income that would support them for the week, they would need twice that amount. They would need a sela, which is shnei shkolim. And that means they have children to support, and it's not enough that you afford them with a shekel per week. Therefore, the halacha is, in such a case, nosim lem sela. They will take from the estate on a weekly basis a sela, which is necessary to pull them through the week, so to speak. And if this person, Ahu Saba, when he was on his deathbed, he really meant a shekel, then let's be medayik in his language. Tnu shekel lebona. He didn't say al titnu lahem ela shekel. Tnu shekel, he didn't say tnu sela, was in order to be mizaris them, that they should be torech themselves. They should study a fach, what we call a malacha, and learn some sort of occupation in order to support themselves. However, The im Omar, if instead he had used a different language, al titnu lahem ela shekel, and ein nosim lahem ela shekel. We have a principle that mitzvah l'shma b'divrei hames. And even if he has many heirs and they won't be able to support themselves with a shekel, but nevertheless, that's what he said. He explicitly designated a ceiling of a shekel for each one of his heirs. Don't give them any more than that. So basically, when a person's on his deathbed, he can define his yoresh, each particular yoresh, what is the maximum amount of money that they can inherit. Now we have another case. In Omar, if he makes the following declaration, that Mesubani, if my children die and they don't leave any zera achareim, yirshu acherim tachteim, may other people, maybe he mentioned them by name, inherit my estate. In such a case, bein sha'amar tnu, bein sha'amar al tinitnu, meaning tnu shekel or al titnu ela shekel, ein nosim lahem ela shekel. Because now he has made himself absolutely crystal clear. This is called a gili das. He doesn't want to give them more than a shekel per week. And the proof is because he said when they will die, then the money is mine and I can give it out to other people. Now this Zakin came up with this brisa and he challenged Ilfa. Can you find the din that is formulated in this brisa in the Mishnah? Amalei, Ilfa had no problem. Hamani, this brisa reflects the shita of Rabbi Meir. In other words, if he said Mesu Yarshai Acherim Tachteim, then that indicates that he wants to be very specific and tight, maximizing the weekly allowance to his heirs of 1 shekel, even though that's not enough to pull them through the week. The Amar Mitzvah L'Kayim Divrei Hames, Rabbi Meir in Masechet Ksubas on Daf Ayin formulated the principle that we have to fulfill the words of a person who's on his deathbed, and that was the Mishnah Ksubas on Daf Samach Tesam and Beis HaMafkid Mos Biad Shlish. Again, Shlish is like the escrow, the person who is going to be designated in charge of divvying up the estate. Kedei liknos lebitos sada o nedunya kishet tinase. In other words, he designated this money in the yad of a shlish so that his daughter would have a sada or some other dowry when she gets married. After he dies, his daughter gets married, and the boss says to the shlish, give the money to my husband. And I trust my husband. He's not going to hold on to the money for himself, but rather he's going to buy a sada on my behalf whenever I want to buy the sada. And Rabbi Meir says, no. Mitzvah l'kayim divrei hames. The shlish should not be listening and obliging the boss, but rather he should take the mos, buy a sada, in order to mekayim divrei aviv hames. Here too, in our brisa, he didn't exactly say, I command to give my monies to somebody else. Minadin, he has no problem of supporting his children as much as they need, because really the moment of the Yerusha belongs to them. He doesn't really owe anything to the Acherim. And therefore, they wouldn't have taken Ela Masha Nishar Liachar Misas Habonim. The Acherim will only be awarded whatever funds are there after the children die. However, we have a principle of Rabbi Meir, Mitzvah L'Kayim Divrei Hames, and he said before he died that they should give to his banim a shekel. and Acherim will inherit them when they die. So therefore, we're going to be very stingy and limited with the money that we're going to give to the Banim, only a shekel, not more. So that after his death, after the death of the Banim, there will be a possibility that there's so much money left that it would be given to Acherim, to those who are not heirs, not relatives, as the Av was mitzvah. Now we have the famous Haggadah of Nachum Ish Gamzu. Amru alav Nachum Ish Gamzu. Shayasuma Nebuch, he was blind, b'shtei einav, in both his eyes. Gidam, Gidei b'shtei yodav, his hands were amputated. Kita b'shtei raglav, his feet were amputated. Because Gufo Molei Shchin, and his body was full of boils. And he was laying in a mita v'raglim itasim munachim b'sfolim shalmayim. The bottom of the bed, meaning the legs of the bed that held up the bed, were submerged in water. Yalu olav b'molim, so that crawling, creeping creatures like ants would not crawl up, because he had no yodayim. And if these nemolim would climb up the legs of the bed, he has no way, Nachum, of taking them in his hands and throwing them away. Now we're going to see what a great tzaddik he was. His house was in his mita. His bed was now situated in a dilapidated house. People didn't know. There wasn't public knowledge that this house was in such precarious situation. When they found out, Bikshu Talmidov lefanos mitos, bi'achach lefanos sakelu. Let's urgently remove the bed of Nachum from this dilapidated house that's about to fall apart. And it's urgent to save its life. Afterwards, if there's still a time, then before the house collapses, then we'll go get the caleb. We'll salvage expensive utensils. You know what? I think you should do it the opposite way. You esakal came first, take out the caleb that are worth money. And then you'll take out my bed. I can promise you, the house will not fall down as long as I'm inside the house, and there'll be no damage to the caleb. But if you'll take me out first, then the bais will fall and the caleb will be destroyed. Pinu es hakelim, they fulfilled the will of the Rebbe, of Nachum, and v'rak achakach pinu es mitasim. So they did in the order that he had suggested. They took out the caleb first, and then they took Nachum himself out. Nafal habayis. Immediately after Nachum was taken out of the house collapsed. Amru Talmid of Rebbe bi'acham sadik gomorat, that in your merit this bias did not fall down. Lama also loch kach. Why is it, they asked him, that your body is in such terrible, terrible shape? Amalahem bana. Ani garam piliatzmi, I took it upon myself. I was on my way to my father-in-law. There was a masa of merchandise that was being carried on the backs of 3 donkeys. On one donkey, was food. I don't know, maybe he didn't trust the kashrus in its fair's place, so he brought his own food. I don't know. Echad, on another one of the donkeys, there was a masa of michte. Probably that means schnapps. Yal echad, masa shel mine begodim, all sorts of tasty foods. Ba'ani echad v'yamar lo b'derech, and a poor person stood in his way. V'yamar li, And he said to me, Rebbe, Arneseni, please give me something to eat. Amarti lo hamtein ad she'efrog min hachamor. You know what? I have food inside these packages that are on the backs of these donkeys. Give me a chance to climb up to the top of the donkey and untie the bags of food and give you food. And apparently this would entail a little bit of a delay. Lo espakti lifrok min hachamor. Nachum Ish Gamzu testifies that he didn't even get a chance to take off the masa from the chamor in order to open that sheyotzin ismashal the ani expired. And Nachum understood that this ani had what's called, this is a disease called bulmus. The whole Mishnah in Gittin about Misha Chasam, bulmus. Bulmus means that if you're starving, then you might die immediately. You're in urgent need for food immediately. And if you look in a person's face and you look at his eyes, you can tell that he is achazo bulmus. And therefore, Nachum feels himself guilty that he should have looked into the face and the eyes of this ani and immediately jumped up, gotten out of his chamor, ripped apart the sock in order to take out food and feed it. Don't start untying the package, the ksharim, there are all sorts. Rip it apart, even if it means destroying it. Halachti v'nafalti al panav. Nachum fell down on the face of this deceased person, Amarti, and he declares, Einai shlo chasu aleinech, my eyes that didn't look into your eyes and to your face to determine whether or not you had bulmus, isomu should be blinded. Yadai shlo chasu al yodecha, my hands that didn't rip apart the sock immediately to remove the Michael in the most urgent way, but rather it was a delay until he would take out the masa and untie its bonds, its bindings. Therefore, my hands, iskamdu, will be amputated. Raglai, l'chasal raglecha. I didn't jump immediately off the chamar onto the ground, but rather I came down slowly. Iskato, they should be amputated. Floniskara daiti, and even that was not enough. Acha marti, kol gufi, yehe molishchin. He took upon himself that his body should be full of these boils. Why? Because that's like a mitzora who has this dermatological, pathological phenomenon. And the Gemara says in the Dharm, mitzora choshiv kemes. In other words, if I caused this man to die from famine, then I deserve to die. Now, when the Talmidim realized what Nachum had done to himself, and for what and why, because of his avera that he didn't immediately jump out and rip apart the sock, is oilanu. The Talmidim said, "Woe to us, that we see what a severe punishment you suffered for an avera kala, for something that's, we could justify your actions, meaning you didn't look into his face, you didn't know, you had no way of being aware of the fact that he was bulmus. He was just asking for a handout of food. It would be woe to me if I hadn't accepted upon myself these punishments in this world, then my sin would not be atoned for, and my reward in the next world would not be complete. What story is in the background of this name Gamzu? Anything that happened, things that looked on the outside to be very difficult, very challenging, he would always respond, Gamzu l'tov. And here's the story. On one occasion, the Jews decided to send a gift to the king, to the Kesar. Amruman Yezel, who should we send it with? Yezel Nochamish Gamzu. We should send Nochamish Gamzu Meluman Benisim. He is well tested with many, many nisim. He's a miracle maker. God brings about miracles on his behalf. And we might as well send him along. The Maharsha is a discussion, by the way, why is Nochamish Gamzu considered so great that he says, Kolman B'Yovid Rachmana L'Tavav? Everybody's required to do so. The Anaf Yosef answers that when a person has to say L'Tav Ovid, he means that somehow from this terrible calamity, something good is going to come out of it. Nochamish Gamzu would say that the Maisa Atzmo in and of itself is L'Tova, not L'Ra. Shadu B'Yodei Melo Sifta. They sent him a full argaz. Sifta is in Hebrew an argaz. I guess you'd call it some sort of a box. The Avonim Tovus Margolios. They sent to the Kesar a box full of precious stones and pearls. Ozal, Nachum went on his way to the king with this argaz, and Bas Dira, and he went to rest overnight in an inn or a hotel. And Belela Kamuhani Diore, at night, the owners of this inn came Vishaklinu L'Sifte, and they took the argaz. They emptied out all the stones, the precious stones, and the pearls. Umalunu Afar, they filled it up with Afar. In other words, it would add some weight, that therefore Nachum would not realize that his precious stones were removed. So Nachum doesn't know anything about it. He takes the argaz to the king. Imota Hassam, when he got there to the king, Sharinu L'Sifta, the Mishar Samel took apart all the bonds, all the ropes that tied up this argaz. They opened it up. Chazinu demoliafa. They see it's full of offer. And boy Malka L'Miktalinu L'Kulu. The king wanted to put all the Jews to death because Omar, he declares, Kamachaychu Beyehudoi. The Jews are making fun of me. They're being mizalzel in my covet. They're sending me offer. Omar, when Nachum realized what's going on over here, he declared, Gamzu L'Tov. And what miracle took place? Os Elio, Idmele Kechad Binayu. Elio appeared in front of the king as one of his officers. The Omar Le, Dilma Ha-Afra, perhaps this offer is me Afra the Avram Avun, who the offer of Abraham, the father of the Jews. And when Abraham went out to battle against the 4 kings, he used this offer, this special offer, the Afra, when he threw the offer on top of his enemies, have a saife, they transform themselves into the knives and spears. And Gili Havigire, and when they threw straw up in the air, it would turn into arrows. The Tziv, as the Pasuk says regarding Avram Avinu, Yitain ke'ofar charbo ke'kash nidof kash, Pasuk in Yeshaya. That his offer was like a cheret, like a sword, and the kash was like chitzei keshes. So this offer that they bring you as a gift, you can use to defeat your enemies. It's the magical offer of their father Abraham. And at that particular juncture, there was one antagonistic country, enemy country, and the Chayolim of the Melech were not able to subdue and defeat the armies of that kingship. Bodkumine, they decided to try an experiment based on the testimony of this individual, this Sar, that this was the offer of Abraham that could turn into Charavot. And Kafshu, they were able to subjugate and defeat that nation. What a great joy it was. They decided to reward Nachum for bringing this magical offer with which they were able to defeat their enemies and give him a gift. They brought him into the Otzar of the Melech, the storehouse, Mil'u, L'sifte. They filled up the same exact argaz with Avonim Tovim Margolis. Vishadru B'Yikar Rabbah. They said that with Kovid Gadol. There was a whole, entourage of Anshe Chayil that took him back. He also, when Nachum on his way back, and he had these Malavim, he decided, Bisu Bahu Diora. Let's go back to the same hotel where I stayed on the way going. Amrule. So the owners of the hotel said to him, these were the ones who actually had stolen his Margolios and replaced them with Ofar. My Isis behadoch di avdiloch yikara kulihai. What did you bring with you from the king? And we see they made you such a covered gadol. You must have gotten rewarded with something special. Amalei, my deshakli mihacha amti lahasa. That which I took from here, I brought to there. Meaning, this very same argaz that the Ame is trunk, we'll call it, right? The Ame that were with me when I went to the king and he found the offer in it, and that offer was turned into charavot, with which the king was able to defeat his enemies. So that's the offer that's in this argaz. And they got very excited about this. They saw that Nachum was rewarded by bringing this offer, and he became wealthy, a millionaire overnight. Therefore, what did they decide to do? They closed up their hotel. We're going on a leave of absence. And they brought the offer from this argaz to the king. Amrule, I offered the Isi Hacham. The offer that we're bringing here to you is the offer of Nachum Ish Gamzu, so that now again you'll be able to defeat your enemies. Mididanu, it's our offer that we're bringing to you. But Ku and the Chayolei HaMelech tested out this offer that was brought by the Baalei HaMamon. They threw it, and Lo Ashkachu, it did not transform itself into Charevos. And therefore, Katlinu Lahani Diyorik, and they put to death the owners of this hotel, because that's a zilzal in the king.